Hi, welcome back. In this last brief lecture, I want to take a moment and actually talk about practicality. How do you actually move forward and implement some of these ideas and concepts in terms of evidence-based practice? In the last lecture, we talked about a lot of necessary steps, but it was somewhat complex. So I want to give you a more simplified version of the way to look at it, and it actually entails a whole lot more information than actually you saw in the last presentation. If you remember our conversation in the very first lecture, one of the very first lectures, we talked about the concept of reality. And we said with any issue, any situation we're looking at, there's 4 dimensions to any situation. And those 4 dimensions actually go all the way back to the time of Plato in terms of his theories of form, where we talked about the good, true, and the beautiful. These concepts, these 4 quadrants, these 4 perspectives you can take are the I, we, it, and its. The individual perspective, the collective subjective perspective, or we, how we look at something together, the individual objective perspective, which is the individual behaviors that we can observe, and the collective objective perspective, which is the systems at play in any situation. So in regards to those, if you look, one of the problems with research is quite often researchers don't use a wide array of studying a given subject. There's actually something known as integral methodological pluralism. And it's this concept of the research methods that fit in to all 4 of these quadrants. And here you see an example of those. When we look at a normal clinical trial, what that is you see it on the right-hand side, what we call empiricism. It's empirical evidence that something is true. We look at it and we're trying to make that determination. But quite often that doesn't take the systems theory perspective into play, which is how it actually works in reality, works in an environment, works in your environment, as we mentioned in the last lecture. It doesn't take into consideration cultural, the cultural aspect of things, how it will work in a given culture and be received and be utilized. I've worked with organizations in terms of dynamic deployment, and it absolutely just did not work the way it was implemented initially in a given system that was very large because of the culture. There wasn't the cultural development to get to the point of utilizing the best practice. So in that regard, sometimes the best empirical evidence-based practice or behavior doesn't work in a given situation. And then there's phenomenology or structuralism. It's how we think and feel about things and how we're willing to internalize that if in your situation there's actually people that have a thought or feeling that something is bad. There's a tendency to sabotage it in some way, as I mentioned in the studies in Houston with mass trousers and IV fluids. And in that case, it's very difficult to see the empirical benefit. So when you look at studies, it's worthwhile to include all of these. Well, how do you do that? Again, you're welcome to go here and try to investigate all of these areas, but I can tell you each one of these areas is a tremendous body of knowledge that will take a tremendous amount of time to go through. The other thing I can say about it is that various academic practices or areas of study fall into these different areas. So for example, if we look at the I, or the subjective singular piece, that's psychology. That's how internally we look at things. If we look at physics, on the other hand, we look at things, we look at empiricisms, truths in terms of physical things out there. That's third person, that's on the right hand side, that's empiricism. If we look at cultural anthropology, cultural studies, that actually is the collective, subjective piece at the bottom left that you see. And then of course there's systems theory, such as the work of Peter Senge at MIT, and systems thinking and U theory, and some of those things that have come out of the business school at MIT. So all of these perspectives make sense to look at. So here's a way that you can actually can actually implement to some extent all of these. If you look at practice in terms of something you're going to do, there's really 4 practical steps you should take to anything. And this really incorporates the concept and the know-how and the knowledge, the epistemology, if you will, which is the theory of knowledge from all of those different modalities of investigation. And it says you start out with an injunction. An injunction corresponds with that upper right quadrant, that it piece, the observation of some behaviors. So if we had a microscope and we're looking at a cell, we can see something. Something's taking place. If we look at in physics, the law of thermodynamics or forces, those things are things we can see quite often, and we can make empirical judgments about. So in an injunction, you do something, you evaluate something to make a determination. In your example, in terms of your research projects or projects you're working on in your organization or clinical guidelines that you're creating, protocols you're updating, policies you're updating, you have to take some and you have to make an injunction. There has to be some injunction involved. You have to look at something, some behaviors. So evaluate the behaviors of your system. Evaluate the behaviors, the empirical knowledge that exists. That's the first step. Look at that. Understand it well. Once you take that, you move to the upper left quadrant, which is the I, how you think and feel about something. It's that how you apprehend something. It's the apprehension. It's how you internalize it, what you think about it. That should be the next step. So once you see the literature, you take the literature, if you will, you read that, or you take the physical study you conduct, even better, and you observe that, and you apprehend that in some way, and that apprehension actually allows you to internalize it. Now you have an opinion about what's taking place. The next step is to actually interpret that in the context of other people. So you share that. And the last 2 steps kind of fall together because it's really, you can do them at the same time, but that interpretation corresponds with the lower left, how you think about it in the context with other people. And then there's this communal evaluation, which corresponds to the lower left and right, which says it's not only what I think, but it's the consensus piece. It's what we think about something. And more than that, it's how it fits in the environment. It's that whole systems piece. So if you walk through these 4 steps in any given evaluation, you should come up with an appropriate practice. And it will allow you to actually do what is, from an evidence base, the most respective practice. There's actually an integral approach to evidence-based practice that incorporates all of these pieces, and that'll actually be one of the readings you have for this week. So I want to stop there and refer you to the readings for this week. And if you have particular questions about anything that was covered in any of these 4 lectures, please post it to the Facebook page.